Welcome to Living Fully. Each episode is a chance to talk about mental health in a way that's simple, honest, and helpful. We'll share stories, tips, and tools to help you feel supported and feel your best. I'm your host, Katherine Hertig. When you meet someone new, what's one of the first things you ask? Probably, so what do you do, right? For a lot of us, work isn't just how we spend most of our time. It's a big part of who we are. So what happens when that suddenly changes? Losing a job, no matter the reason, can stir up a mix of emotions. Grief, anxiety, maybe even shame. It's a lot to process. In this episode, I'm joined by social worker Jessica Sitko to talk about what comes next. We'll explore how to navigate all those feelings, find a way forward, and most importantly, rediscover who you are beyond just your job. So today we are talking about how to cope if we lose our jobs. There's a lot of feelings that come up when that happens. We're going to talk about themes around identity and, the uncertainty and anxiety when that happens and grief. Lots of different feelings. And I'm here with social worker Jessica Sitko. Thanks so much for chatting with me today, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And you haven't been on the podcast before. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so like you said, I am a social worker. I've been with the Calgary Counseling Centre for about a year now. I'm originally from Ontario, and I've been living and working in Calgary for almost 3 years now.
Excellent. Thanks again. And we're talking about coping after job loss. So, Jessica, when someone loses a job, it can kind of feel like losing a part of who we are.
Yeah.
So, why do our careers feel so tied to our identity?
Well, I think it's kind of like increasingly so that they're feeling tied to our identity. I was thinking kind of like even historically, we didn't really choose our jobs. It's kind of like if your dad was a carpenter, you were probably going to be a carpenter.
Right.
Or, even those like gendered roles around what employment looked like was a lot more laid out for you. And now this kind of emphasis around choice around careers, I think really kind of digs in that feeling like culturally that our jobs really are sort of important to us.
For sure. And I think we're expected to kind of decide and figure that out really early.
Yeah, totally. When you think about like the messaging that teenagers get about kind of like making big choices for their life, those are framed as really big choices that are kind of really tied to, their interests and their values. Like, why are you choosing a career path that's, XYZ versus something else?
Right.
It really kind of comes down a lot to values.
Yeah, and also it's where we spend so much of our time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're working full time, that's 40 plus hours a week. So I'd think that it'd be difficult not to feel like your job is a part of who you are.
Yeah, we start to identify it when we spend so much time there. It's also kind of like social identification. Like when you meet someone new for the first time, what's kind of the first question you ask?
Oh, totally.
Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
Exactly. And so when that's the first question, kind of starts to become like, what is important about me is my job is like one of those first things.
Yeah. And so obviously that can be a real hit.
Yeah.
If we end up losing our jobs for some reason.
Yeah. And I think it's like a big part of your routine. And like what is predictable about life is like you're going to go to work on Monday.
Yeah.
You're going to see your coworkers. There's a lot of like social connection that's really built around work for a lot It
Completely.
And so if we lose our job, it can feel like a loss of our routine, a loss of our identity, a loss of our social group. It can take over like a lot of the different areas of your life, for sure.
So if someone loses their job, what typically are some of the feelings, the thoughts that they might experience?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it depends on individual circumstances, but certainly like feeling of failure or rejection, especially, again, depending on the circumstances around the job loss. A lot of the time embarrassment. It can be really hard to have these conversations with friends and family, regardless of kind of the reason for the job loss. That can feel really kind of shameful and difficult to talk about.
Yeah, going from there, I mean, these, uncomfortable feelings, I mean, that sounds like it could really impact your self-esteem, your self-worth.
Yeah, entirely. Yeah, because it's kind of, again, like, what do we get from work? For a lot of people, it's like a main source of, I don't know, like success, like feeling
Right.
like,
Yeah.
you're kind of making progress is a lot of the time in your job. And so to kind of take that away
And that's
also
just,
is, yeah.
yeah, like this societal expectation, like that's kind of a commonly accepted, what am I trying to say?
Like a marker of success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, is, progress in your career. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of a two-part question, like would you say it's kind of important for someone to separate their self-worth a bit from just their job title and what they do? And if so, like how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so I think the key word there is probably like a bit, and maybe like separating from the title, because certainly we want our work to feel meaningful. Like I think
Yeah.
that there's nothing wrong with enjoying your job and seeing it as valuable and seeing it as
course.
important, and seeing your interactions there as meaningful or important. But we don't want that to be kind of like the only pillar of your life, so to speak.
Right.
If you kind of picture that roof of a house and we just stick one pillar underneath of it, if that one pillar crumbles, the whole roof is coming down,
Yeah.
right? And so, when you're asking how do we sort of start to separate that, I think it's about building up some other pillars of your life so that if we were to, lose a job and we have to take out that pillar of work, the whole house doesn't crumble. We have other things that we're invested in, other social connections, other hobbies, other interests, other sources of success, other sources of progress, and other sources of value in life, such that, if any one of those pillars kind of goes down for a while, or, an illness comes in, or something else happens in life, we want to be able to maintain the other important things in life
Right.
without kind of losing sight of our identity.
You listed some examples there, but what other kind of quote unquote pillars would a person potentially have?
Yeah, so it could look like friendships, it could look like our intimate relationships, partnerships, could look like family and hobbies, could look like, religious interests, if that's relevant to the person. I think everybody's going to have those different pillars and things that kind of keep them going, but we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket.
Yeah, that's funny that you use that. I'm sure everyone who listens to this podcast is sick of hearing me talk about running. But I got into running the past few years, and I will say that it's taught me so much about my mental health. And I, like my own therapist, I had that conversation with her about, not putting all my mental health eggs in one basket, because, I was loving running so much. It was so great for me. But then I got a stress fracture. And so I couldn't for a while, and I felt a little lost.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, now what do I do to feel better? So, yeah, I think that's important. I mean, in any aspect of our life is to not be like all in with anything.
Yeah, to be kind of
that makes
spreading
sense.
out our resources,
Yeah.
and growing in different areas of our life. Like if, again, we kind of sometimes talk about like the work-life balance,
Right.
as being, trying to spend different amounts of time doing different things and putting different emphasis on different areas of our life. And if we're focusing all of that on work, there's not much time left for other things
Yeah.
to grow other areas of your life, and to spend that time. But I think your example is a really good one, because it is kind of like once that illness comes in, or you have a stress
Yeah.
fracture, and we can't have that pillar be so sturdy anymore,
Yeah.
or so present. It's like, well, what else is going to like hold up the foundation?
Yeah, I'm sure like you've worked with your clients on that too. It's like you got to have these different coping tools, not just one coping tool.
Yeah.
Because if that doesn't work, or if that isn't accessible to you, you got to be able to pull on something else.
Yeah, and I mean, never mind job loss, but just like job change. If we're really like tied to this certain title or certain role, and then
Right.
things shift, maybe it's not even that you've lost your job, but that things are shifting in a way that, no longer is like representative of how you used to view that role.
Yeah.
We also don't want that to make you crumble either. So we have to kind of be, I think, flexible is maybe the key word here.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, we talk about flexibility a lot here. It comes up. If we lose our job, it's like you said, a loss.
Yeah.
And I don't think we don't really talk about the grief that comes with that. And so why Jessica, do you think it's important to kind of acknowledge those emotions?
Well, I think grief is the right word, first of all, because it is most times really unexpected, whether it's for cause or for, you being laid off or just unexpected changes. That's often how grief presents itself as well. It's not often this thing that we get to really prepare for. And so just the shock alone can feel quite traumatic. Like it is a huge shift. And I think if your question is like, why do we need to talk about these things? Number one, it's real. It's something that we don't really talk about. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of the feelings that tend to come up are this feeling of like shame or embarrassment. It's so hard to talk about because it's so tied into this identity piece that we've been mentioning, that we got to acknowledge how real that feeling is. Anyone who's been through this like really knows that feeling. And if we don't acknowledge it, we do kind of run the risk, number one, of having that feeling continue to impact us moving forward in a next role. That's really common as well, right? That fear of losing the next job or of doing something wrong. And, if we're not able to process and acknowledge those emotions and do something about them right now, they're not likely to go away. I often use this analogy of like a pot that's boiling over, like putting a lid on it and kind of like pushing it down doesn't actually really stop the water from boiling over. It just maybe delays it a little bit. And so when we acknowledge it, we give a little bit of space to acknowledge like the realness of those feelings. And then it helps us to figure out what we need. Like if we don't know how we're feeling, I'm not actually sure how to figure out what should be next. If we're feeling rejected, for example, what might we need? Maybe connection, maybe some support, maybe a sense of success, maybe a sense of purpose. Being able to find those things is important, but first we need to know that that's actually something that we're missing, something that we're needing, which often comes from like acknowledging the feelings that are there in the first place.
I'm sure you've worked with clients. I mean, maybe not necessarily on this exact situation, but this idea of like acknowledging and sitting with these uncomfortable feelings. What does that process look like? How do you help people kind of work on that?
Yeah. So again, I think it a little bit depends person to person. But a lot of the time it's kind of like almost giving permission to feel these things, to not kind of like push them down or bury them, to, normalize it almost. Like there is something that's really human and real about feeling this way, and making space for it is going to kind of be that first step, I think.
I think that's really important, because like the shame and embarrassment feeling you brought up, like acknowledging like, this is a normal way to feel in this scenario. Like it kind of, I don't know, just validating it.
Yeah, and I think being gentle with yourself too through that. Like, you're already feeling shame and stress and uncertainty and all of these things. Do we also have to kind of dogpile on that and say, well, and I shouldn't be feeling this way. I should just move on, and I should just, be strong, and I'll just not show anyone how I'm feeling. It's like,
it doesn't help.
I don't know if that helps. It's kind of like we already have a layer of shame. Do we have to add like a second layer that's now shame about feeling shame?
Right.
It's like, if we could take away one of those layers, would that lessen the overall shame? Like maybe. Could we just make space for it and not just try to like feel okay all the time? Yeah.
Okay, so let's turn this around. Let's try to make it a little more positive. Like how can someone maybe frame job loss as a chance to, rethink their career path or maybe explore new opportunities?
Yeah, so I often go to this place of getting curious about things. How can we view things with some like genuine curiosity, which by that I sort of mean like not filling in the blanks ahead of time. So we sometimes say like, well, what's next for me? Probably nothing. Like probably I'll never, get anywhere again. Probably I'll never have a job that good. Probably no one's going to hire me. That doesn't sound very curious. It sounds like you've already kind of like decided the outcome. And I think a big piece is like, how can we reframe that into like, what could be next? What have I already gained from this last role? What did I learn from that? And I think also being curious about like, what maybe needed to be changed about your past role, like what maybe wasn't working for you, or if you had the opportunity in that role to change something, what would that have been? And how can you kind of build that into the possibilities for the future? I'm sure we all have things about our jobs that we don't love, that are, maybe not working the best for us, or if it was really up to us, we might change something about our schedule, or,
For sure.
different things like that. And so seeing those little desires that you probably, felt or noticed day to day, picking up on those and seeing like, is there an opportunity to do something different for myself in this next stage, knowing that there was some things that maybe weren't 100% perfect, ideal in that last role. And really, again, like getting curious about that, being really open about it.
It's an interesting spot to be in. I remember I was between jobs in my early 20s, and it can be a great opportunity. Like you have all this time on your hands, but there is just always this baseline of worry because I didn't know when my next paycheck was going to be. So it was difficult to kind of think growth and opportunity when you're also stressed about money.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it does bring up so much, again, like uncertainty and just the unknown. Although, the unknown is kind of like, again, can we view that as something that is genuinely unknown?
Right. And not, just because it's unknown doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah, and not kind of like filling in those blanks, because oftentimes we kind of do like frame even the word unknown sort of like spooky, scary. Yeah. But if we were like sort of curious about it, again, like unknown sounds like a lot of opportunities. Unknown sounds like a lot of unknown in a way that isn't necessarily negative or like scary. It is stressful for sure to be in those places. And I think, again, we go back to like, we also need to acknowledge that what we shouldn't do actually is sort of pretend that everything is sunshines and rainbows, because that doesn't do a great thing for the anxiety either, right? That doesn't really actually do anything. That sort of is like putting that lid on the pot again and sort of burying it.
Like it's a balance, right? It's not, I guess it's all a matter of timing with these things. It's not like you should expect yourself, the day you lose your job to have this mindset of, anything's possible. This is a new opportunity. I think we're going in steps. It's probably that's the time to, acknowledge your feelings and have some self-compassion. But, as you go on, be a bit more curious.
And like giving yourself time to grieve. Like we said earlier, like grief is the right word. We wouldn't expect you also to like, after experiencing, a real big loss in your life, to just bounce back the next day either.
Totally.
We would probably expect, and even like societally, we kind of give people permission to have like a grieving process, a grieving period, like time to do that.
And in so many ways, like you had mentioned the different aspects of a job, like yes, it's what we do, it's how we make money, it's, a measure of success, but that social aspect.
Yeah.
Like when you talked about that, it made me think before working here, I was at a job and like I chose to leave, but there was still definitely grief there because I had worked with this group of people for 5+ years. That was my routine of seeing these people every day, seeing them more than my partner. Yeah. Then all of a sudden I wasn't going to see them anymore.
And like, what does that mean for your relationships? Will you continue to keep in touch? Will you, will the friendships go outside of work? Like, there's a lot of unknowns again, right?
And a lot of times you go in with the best intentions thinking like, we're going to stay in touch.
Sure,
and sometimes that happens, but sometimes it doesn't.
For sure.
Yeah. Have you worked with clients, or how would you approach working with clients just around that idea of financial uncertainty? Like, how do you approach that worry?
Yeah. So, I mean, what we know is that anxiety does not like uncertainty. No. Anxiety hates the uncertainty, the unknown. And that's kind of like the anxiety is sort of what colors that word like unknown with all this bad connotation, right? And so I think first we got to acknowledge, like, there's something about this that makes sense. There is a lot of uncertainty. Does it make sense that there's a part of you that's really like pretty worried about all of this? Like, totally. What we don't need to do is like, again, pretend everything's sunshines and rainbows and just shut down that feeling. Anxiety is like a tool. There's a reason that anxiety comes up in our bodies and in our brains. It's not meant to only sort of debilitate us and make us have a bad day. It's meant to help us prepare to solve problems. That's like the purpose and the function of anxiety.
Right.
Oftentimes our anxiety doesn't know the difference between, preparing to turn around the corner and see a bear and preparing to go into a job interview. And yet the feeling is kind of the same sometimes, right? And so if we're trying to manage that, I think, again, first thing, there's something about this that makes sense. There's something about anxiety that's helpful. If we weren't anxious at all, you probably wouldn't be out searching for a job. You probably wouldn't care about your financial situation. Like if we took away all the anxiety, I don't know if that would be better. There's something that's useful about it. So we need to hang on to the part that's useful. And we need to be able to tell the difference between like, when is my anxiety productive and helpful to me? When is it, pushing me to grow and to do these applications and to do a budget and to do all these things?
Yeah.
And when is it actually holding me back from doing those important things?
Right.
And noticing the difference. And that can be hard sometimes too, to notice like, when is this worry helpful and when is this worry like holding me in place? Yeah, I would kind of think about getting some info, like knowing that anxiety doesn't like the uncertainty. What is certain about like right now? What do we know about your situation?
Right.
Are you eligible for EI? Have you looked into that? What do your savings look like? How long can you actually sustain being unemployed for? And getting really real about those things so that the anxiety knows, how worried do we need to be about this?
Yeah.
And getting that info a lot of the time takes away some of that uncertainty because there's less questions to be answered. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I've talked with counselors a lot about anxiety over the last few years, obviously, with everything that's been going on.
Sure.
And I think, that's something that has really resonated, this idea of, what do you know and what is in your control.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think looking out for those like extreme thoughts, because they can really slip by us sometimes, the thoughts that are
like the worst case scenario.
Like, I'm going to end up losing my house. I'm going to be living in my car. I'm never going to get hired again. Those are like some really all or nothing kind of thoughts. Those are some really extreme thoughts.
Yeah.
And just being aware of them. Because again, the anxiety doesn't often know the difference between this uncomfortable feeling and, some real actual imminent threat of danger. And it will start to tell you, the anxiety will start to tell you like really extreme things about what the future is going to hold and try to fill in those blanks. Noticing those and being able to step back from it, ask yourself the question of like, wait a second, do I know that? Like, is that true? Or is the anxiety trying to solve some of this unknown and fill in some of those blanks for me with the worst case scenario?
Right.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I would say about like, what do we need to do with this anxiety?
Yeah.
I think just talking about it, again, like there's so much guilt and shame and embarrassment and all kinds of stuff wrapped up in this that it becomes very hard for people to talk about it. Becomes very hard to like ask for support or to express those feelings, to express like the real uncertainties that are there. It can be kind of a barrier to actually getting that information.
For sure.
When we're able to talk about something out loud, it often sounds really different than it does in your head. Like, if I come to you and I say, I just lost my job and I'm certain, I just know I'm going to end up living in my car. Like, what's your kind of natural response to that?
Yeah, it would be like, okay, well, that's one extreme, but, let's look at where you're at now and...
Yeah. You kind of like instantly almost want to challenge me. You're like, wait a second. Like,
totally.
Okay, this happened yesterday. Let's back up a little bit. Is that really true? Instantly, when we start talking about this with people, those thoughts don't often get validated.
Right.
And in our head, if we keep them all in there, they often are validated again and again and again because the anxiety feels like it knows that that's what's going to happen. When we say it out loud, suddenly we get some other feedback.
I mean, lots of different thoughts, lots of emotions that come up with job loss. I mean, I'm sure at some point, if you're out of work for quite a while, I mean, that could even lead you, to a bit of a depression, a loss of, a purpose. Yeah. So Jessica, like, what advice would you give to someone who feels like, maybe they have lost a bit of their purpose after losing a job?
Yeah, so I hear, I think, what you're asking with that question, which is like, maybe what might I say to someone who's really sort of experiencing those feelings? I do get a little bit stuck on the word advice, though.
Okay.
Because when I think about my role as a counselor, giving advice is like not in my job description.
No, okay.
Which I think a lot of people have that sort of idea that that's what counseling is for, right? Is like, tell me what to do next.
Yeah.
And in some ways, like, we're not totally off base with that. But what my role definitely is not is to like tell people what to do or to,
Right.
pretend that I have the perfect right answer, that if they just do that one thing, everything will get better. And I think it's sort of actually important to like make that distinction.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
That what I can do is like work with people to figure out what might be best for them, ask the questions, get kind of clear on what actually is going on in your life, so that we can empower people to make choices that they can deem are right for them or
Right.
not. But what I'm not going to be doing is, saying, here's the magic key,
Yeah.
go do this, and come back and everything will be fine. And so I guess to come back to your question, when we're thinking about losing a sense of purpose, again, like I come back to, is there something about that makes sense, that so much of the hours of your week are tied up in work, so much of your social interaction often, not for every job but often, is tied up in work, so much of like your daily routine
I know.
is really tied up in work.
Yeah.
So much of like how we identify is going to have something to do with work. And so does it make sense that like a little piece of what you view as like kind of the purpose of your day or of your week is suddenly not the same anymore? Like, for sure, there's something that's really valid about that. That's like a really normal response, right? To kind of have this sudden gap. Literally, in your week, you have like a lot more hours available to you. Can we kind of acknowledge that? And then I guess I'm curious too to know, like, what is the lost purpose? I was thinking about, is the loss of purpose that you really had a sense of like value and purpose in your job, like you really felt like you were accomplishing something and maybe doing some good for the world, or there's some value that was lost and the purpose that was lost just in the actual role?
Right.
Or is the loss of purpose like, well, why do I have to wake up now? Like, why do I have to leave the house?
Yeah.
Those are two really different types of purpose.
Totally.
One of those, we might replace it with a new job. Yeah, if like the loss of purpose was like the thing that you were accomplishing or doing in that role, yeah, we might not instantly be able to bring that back into your life. But if your question is like, well, what's my reason for getting out of bed? I imagine there would be other purposes, other senses of value, other reasons that we could give you. Again, coming back to that idea of like the different pillars, like,
Yeah.
that's kind of a different question.
Definitely. Yeah, we have to work on not just having a single purpose in our heads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's like that extreme thought, right? It's like my
Yeah.
only purpose was doing this job or doing this thing or like
Yeah.
seeing my friends at work. And when we zoom out from that extreme thought, there's probably other purposes.
Yeah, and other
probably-
possibilities.
Yeah, other things that are still meaningful to you in your life. We have to kind of draw on those things so that we can figure out in the meantime, like, what will your purpose be? How will we kind of fill in some of those gaps? How will we like keep you moving while we look for that next thing? But to feel that feeling of like, oh, I'm not sure what my purpose is anymore, that seems like a really natural response to me.
Yeah. Kind of going back to that thing about counseling process, because I totally remember being in counseling and kind of having, it wasn't the expectation that I'd be given the answers, but there'd be a question and like, I don't know, what do you think? Like the counselor was posing it to me, like, what do you think about this situation? And like, I legit didn't know. I didn't know the answer.
Yeah.
So how do you work with a client in that kind of situation when you're kind of trying to open those doors, but they don't know? Does that make sense? Yeah. Let's say, you're working with a client, lost their job, they're dealing with all these things, and they ask you like, what should I do next? I'm assuming in the counseling process, the counselor is asking a lot of questions to kind of get the client to think about things in a different way. What is kind of the process if they really don't know, if they're kind of stuck on those answers themselves? Is it as simple as just asking a different question or in a different way, or?
I mean, I think, again, it kind of like depends person
Totally,
to person.
yeah.
Sometimes it is like, maybe we're asking the wrong question. Like,
Yeah.
maybe we don't even know the problem that we're trying to solve. It's sometimes people come to counseling just feeling this general stuckness. We're not sure where it's coming from. So it's very hard to ask the question or to answer the question of, what should I do about this?
Yeah.
Because we don't actually even know what the problem is. So sometimes we have to actually backtrack and maybe ask if we even know what the problem is that we're
Right.
trying to solve, because it's going to be quite hard actually to come to a solution if we don't know like what the problem is. And then, I think other times it's like, again, being just kind of like curious in a new way about what we've already tried, what worked about that, what didn't work about that. And most people are not coming to counseling with like zero coping skills, right?
Yeah.
Most people are coming in with something that maybe has worked for them a little bit. They're coming in with something that's working, but maybe it's not sustainable, like all kinds of different things. And so if we're trying to figure out like what to do, sometimes we also have to figure out like what's keeping you going right now. And are those things actually working? Like if we kept doing those same coping strategies moving forward, like would your life get where you want it to be? Would you be living the life you want to live?
Right.
Sometimes the answer is no. We're like coping just in a way that is what we can do or with the resources that we have in that moment. And we know that it's not sustainable to keep going forward like that, right?
So we've talked about how it's important to have these conversations about what we're feeling when it comes to job loss. I don't know if that was like primarily talking to a counselor, but I mean, the idea of having these conversations with people in your lives, family, partners, friends, that kind of thing. I can imagine that that's like quite the struggle. Like I'm thinking about, times where, I felt ashamed or embarrassed. The last thing I want to do is admit that and talk about it with somebody really close to me. But I can also see how it's mental health wise, it's really productive thing. So how do you work with people to kind of push them to have those conversations? How do we practice that, get more comfortable with it?
Yeah, I think, again, coming back to like our last little conversation there, I'm not going to be pushing anyone to have any type of conversation. That's not necessary. I think a lot of the time around things like job loss, we actually do really need to figure out like, who do we need to have this conversation with? Because what's maybe not helpful or necessary is to, go on Facebook and say, I just lost my job.
Yeah.
Is that helpful? Maybe. My sense is maybe no.
Right.
But
I guess like one extreme to the other, not so good. Like, probably can't keep it to yourself, but don't need to shout it from the rooftops.
Yeah, exactly. Like we don't need to, set yourself up to have like a million of these conversations if it's, maybe not relevant to everybody. But I imagine that for many people, there would be folks in their lives who are really impacted actually by this. Like if you're thinking about how a job loss impacts your family or your partner and the financial situation that you find yourselves in, that's an important conversation to have because you're not the only one impacted there. And it's not, it's a weird thing to say, but it's not really like kind of just about the job loss. It's now about how are we planning our future together? What does that look like now that some of the circumstances have changed? And having, I think, a productive conversation in which we're doing a little bit of acknowledging of the facts, we're doing a little bit of planning, getting on the same page about, again, what's true. If we want to like rebuild some confidence, if we want to, rebuild our understanding of ourselves and our circumstances, a lot of the time, the first thing we need to do is like get really real about what's true, even when it's really uncomfortable. Yeah. We do probably, with our partners, like need to talk about what does our savings look like? What are our plans that maybe need to go on hold now, given this? What will our plan be together moving forward? Yeah.
And those conversations like might be difficult, they might be uncomfortable, but yeah, they're important to have.
Yeah, and to be sort of, again, like if we're asking for support, can we do that in a way that is like really genuine and vulnerable without sort of falling to this like either minimizing, because that's not helpful, right? We need to have like a realistic plan, or just avoiding the conversations altogether, like also, again, kind of not helpful, not really productive towards something. Right. But like you say, it can be really uncomfortable because there is all of that shame and guilt and all kinds of things kind of mixed into this. And being, I think, a little bit okay with that. It's like sitting in that discomfort. There's almost no way, I think, to have this conversation that's going to feel like great, like best dinner conversation ever, right? It's not probably going to feel like that, right? But can we approach it in a way that's like, this is going to be uncomfortable? How can we be a team about this?
And I mean, speaking of how it affects other people in our lives, if we have someone in our life who has lost their job, what can we be looking out for in terms of their mental health? Like what can we spot, to see, if they might be really struggling emotionally.
Yeah,
with
I
that
think
change.
that's a great question, right? Because there's always two sides to this. It's not just the person who's lost the job, but also like, yeah, the people in their life and how that's impacting. The first thing is kind of that withdrawal, right? If we're not able to have any conversations, they're kind of maybe socially isolating themselves, kind of not doing their regular routines. Like that's often a sort of related with depression anyways. We, stop running or stop doing the things that previously were important to us, stop, taking care of ourselves. That a lot of the time it's going to look like poor sleep or not sleeping properly, maybe not taking care of like your personal hygiene, maybe not eating at regular times. Like we might start skipping meals, loss of appetite, or it could kind of go the other way sometimes too, or kind of like stress eating, kind of noticing those things, feelings of hopelessness, or maybe not leaving the house, all of those kinds of things. And we mentioned earlier about coping mechanisms. We might start to use some maladaptive coping mechanisms. So like if our substance use increases, suddenly instead of just a glass of wine, we're having the whole bottle or something, right? Like we might start to find other ways to cope that, again, maybe in the moment, sort of like feel like they're doing something helpful.
Yeah.
It's like taking us away from some of the more painful feelings, but in the long term, it's not really sustainable. Yeah. And so kind of just keeping an eye on those things. And I think checking in with your loved ones when this is going on, because it can feel so isolating and hard to talk about, like making space for that and really asking the questions and kind of maybe trying to be as understanding as you can, even if you've never experienced this.
Yeah. So losing a job, I mean, we're talking about this very broadly, and there can be many different reasons for that. But if you've been let go from a job, there can be feelings of rejection or failure. And so how can people kind of go through those feelings, process them in a healthy way?
Yeah. I mean, it is one of those things where those feelings are going to like make sense in some way, right? Like in some way, you have kind of like faced a real rejection. It's not all in your head, right? There is like something real that's happened. And so I think acknowledging without dwelling, right? We have this real tendency to like really stick in that like deep dark spot of either self-blame or really going through the events and, maybe if I had said this, maybe if I did this differently, maybe all these, really kind of like staying down in that pit and kind of going in that little spiral. I definitely know that feeling. I don't know if you do, but like really getting into that kind of thought spiral there. I think we can acknowledge without kind of dwelling on it and trying to separate out. Like there is a difference between thinking to yourself, I got rejected versus like, I am a reject. Like really thinking about how is this permeating into my sense of self, and is it going there? Like, trying to kind of notice again those extreme thoughts of like, I am a failure versus like, I failed at this task, or I didn't get the job, or I didn't.
Like situations, they can be fact, but we don't need to make it a reflection on us as a person.
Yeah, oftentimes this kind of delineation comes up with the difference between guilt and shame. We sometimes talk about shame as being like, it's about me, like I am bad is kind of what shame says, and guilt says like I did something bad. Yeah.
I just had this conversation with Lisa in a previous episode.
Yeah, and so similar kind of messaging there, right? When we start to personalize this and make it that like I am a failure, really noticing that, like checking that, is that true, or is that one of those really extreme thoughts? That's like, can we balance that out a little bit? Like, is it true that you as a person are a failure?
Right.
That's a huge statement. That's a huge label to put on yourself.
Yeah, for all the reasons we've talked about, it's super difficult to not take things about our job personally, but in a lot of ways, we don't need to take it personally. I mean, for like so many reasons, you could be laid off. And that's most often not a personal thing. It's not about you. It's about, something that has absolutely nothing to do with you. So it's just kind of, taking note of those things and remembering the stuff that, it's totally outside of your control.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of the times too, especially just in the way that the corporate world or things are kind of structured these days, there's a lot of actions that get taken when you are laid off or when you lose a job for any reason that feel really personal. that are maybe not personal at all, that are part of like the HR policy of like what it is when somebody loses their job, is that it's going to be without notice, is that it's going to be effective immediately. That can feel so personal and so sort of shocking and add to that, like the kind of like, cold, especially when like a lot of the times, like the person that's coming to you to tell you you're no longer going to be employed here is like someone that you probably have somewhat of a relationship with.
Right.
And that can feel so personal and uncomfortable. And it's so unfortunate, but it is like, it can be just one of those things that is no one in the situation is getting to do the thing that they would really like to do or to give the personal touch that they would like to, but it can feel so cold and impersonal, and we kind of take that to heart and say, oh, it's about me. Like, I am bad as a person, I have failed as a person, rather than, kind of zooming out of that. And it's hard in the moment, and that's why we give ourselves that time to be able to process it, to come to like a slightly different conclusion or to have a more balanced thought, because it's not likely that it's going to happen in that moment on that day. You're going to kind of have all these revelations.
Yeah, I used to think that like having great mental health was just always reacting positively in negative situations, and like that would be the automatic thing. Like something bad happens and it doesn't even affect you. But that's like, as I've aged, I've learned that that's not it. It's just kind of going at it with a different mindset, because you can't avoid pain. You can't avoid hard things happening to you. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to feel badly about those things, but it's just kind of how you choose to navigate that. Yeah.
And like, what does it tell you actually about yourself that you're feeling badly about these things? Like, what values does that reflect? The fact that you do feel like a little bit guilty about, something that you did, or that you do feel badly that you're no longer in this role. Like, sounds like there's something important to you about that. It sounds like there's like some values there that are being reflected. Again, we come back to like, emotions are generally meant to be helpful. Right? Like, guilt as a feeling is not very comfortable or fun. But it does kind of tell us something about the path we're on, if we're making the right moves that are going to take us towards like being the person we want to be. Maybe we've made some moves that are taking us actually further away from the life we want to live, further away from the person we want to be. The guilt kind of is like a little arrow that can point us in the direction and let us know when we've gone off track.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, but we can just get kind of tied up just in the guilt and not notice like the little arrow that's telling us, hey, like, just do something different next time. Why don't you try this? Because it feels so uncomfortable to have that feeling.
Totally.
Yeah.
Any last things, Jessica, that you want people to know? I mean, it's not really a quick 10-tip conversation, but any last thoughts that you want to leave people with about how to deal with job loss? Yeah, I would say first, you're just not alone. It's such a common experience that we just, as a society, just do not make space to talk about, really. You're just not alone. And the more that you can have those conversations, the more you're probably going to realize that. I know that when I experienced being laid off, I was shocked, actually, when I went to some friends, because I had never heard their story about that happening to them. And it was extremely validating in that moment. To not everyone has experienced this, but so many more people than you think have kind of been in that position. And it's not fun. It really is not. It's an incredibly common experience. And the best way to find out that you're not alone is to start talking about it, and to get some support. Our friends and family can sometimes offer that like helping hand, or a shoulder and a listening ear, but there are so many resources that I think a lot of folks don't actually know about for when we're facing these situations, many of which are entirely free to access and are maybe those stepping stones that a lot of folks need. You don't have to do this alone. Like, sometimes we haven't looked at our resume in the last 10 years. Like, maybe we need some support with that, especially like the job market is changing, and the way that you apply for a job is different maybe than it was the last time that you had to submit an application. There's a lot of things to know about setting yourself up for success, and you just like don't have to do it by yourself. There's people who know the answers to these questions who can kind of like support you and guide you along in figuring some of these things out. You just don't have to do it alone, and you're certainly not alone in dealing with this. Thanks so much, Jessica.
Yeah, thank you.
You've been listening to Living Fully, a Calgary Counseling Center podcast. Thank you for tuning in. This episode was produced by Nick here Louisa Campos, Manuel Montano, Jenna Forbes, and by me, Catherine Hertig. A special thanks to Jessica Sitko. To stay up to date on our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe. We're available in your favorite podcast app. Living Fully is a production of Calgary Counseling Centre and recorded in Calgary on Treaty 7 territory. Living Fully podcast is not a substitute or alternative for professional care or treatment. Calgary Counseling Centre and Counseling Alberta provide effective counseling to anyone in Alberta with no waitlist and no financial barriers. Find us online at calgarycounseling.com and counselingalberta.com. For help across Canada and the United States, call 211. If you are outside of Canada and the US, seek help from your general medical practitioner.